The October Crisis occurred in the 1970s in Quebec. The October Crisis started with a group calling themselves the FLQ. The FLQ started out as residents networked whom wished for a faster action. This group eventually broke up, forming the FLQ. The terrorist group was founded in the 1960s and conducted a number of attacks between 1963 and 1970, which totaled over 160 violent incidents and killed 8 people and injured many more. In February 1963, the founding members of FLQ celebrated by throwing a Molotov cocktail at the windows of an English radio station. The next month, they firebombed the Canadian Forces barricade. 6 additional bombings rocked Montreal during March and April 1963. So it was just the beginning of acts from the terrorist group known as the FLQ. Without exaggerating the extent of international terrorism in the 1970s, it was not a fact of daily life for the vast majority of Canadians. Kidnappings or hijackings were becoming more popular. Political violence was gaining greater visibility. Incidents of terrorist violence appeared frequently in the newspaper and on television. The October Crisis didn't begin until 1970s when the kidnapping of James Cross and Pierre Laporte by the FLQ. On October 5th, 1970, armed FLQ gunmen kidnapped a British diplomat named James Cross. On October 10th, several men from a second FLQ cell found Quebec Cabinet Minister Pierre Laporte. Armed with machine guns, they dragged him into a car and held him captive. The kidnappers demanded a series of public messages, including the freeing of a number of convicted or detained FLQ members, a $500,000 ransom, and the broadcast of the FLQ manifesto. The police organized one of their largest manhunts in Canadian history, carrying out nearly 1,000 raids and arresting, questioning, and then releasing about 50 people a day. Suddenly, the FLQ seemed capable of organizing and coordinating actions that threatened the government. On October 12th, the military began patrolling the streets of Ottawa. Rumors spread that a group of Quebecers was setting up a provisional government to replace them. Stories seemed to acquire some credibility on October 14th when leading figures in Quebec's media called a press conference to demand that the government negotiates with the FLQ. Meanwhile, Federal Economic Minister John Machard warned his colleagues about potential rebellion and informed the police on October 15, 1970. 3,000 people crowded into Paul Savary Arena in Montreal chanting pro-FLQ slogans. At a university in Montreal, more than 1,000 students attended a speech and signed a petition in support of the FLQ manifesto. Reinforcements poured into the province, and by the night of October 15, 6,000 troops were stationed in Montreal. Soldiers lined the streets of the city and patrolled government buildings. Tanks roamed city streets, and soldiers in full battle gear raided homes in the hunt for terrorists. Some felt like they lived in a police state.
During an interview, a reporter asked Trudeau, "At any cost, how far will you go with that? How far will you extend that?" And Trudeau's infamous answer, "Well, just watch me." In the early hours of October 16th, Pierre Trudeau invoked the War Measures Act, a piece of legislation first passed in 1914 that gave the federal government emergency powers. It gave broad powers to the Canadian government to maintain security and order during war. The War Measures Act gave sweeping emergency powers to the federal cabinet, allowing it to govern when it perceived the existence of war or invasion. The following day, Laporte's body was found in the trunk of an abandoned car. The punch of the WMA, or War Measures Act, and the horror at Laporte's murder essentially knocked the stuffing out of any FLQ support. When the police eventually discovered where Cross was being held, a deal was struck on December 4th. He was freed, and his kidnappers were flown to Cuba. Laporte's abductors surrendered on December 28th. Although Canadians overwhelmingly approved of Trudeau's actions, there was a backlash in some circles, and it grew over the years. And part of this backlash was a response to the WMA's temporary suspension of civil rights and the broad scope that related arrests. Very few of those detained were ever charged. While the act was in effect, 465 people were arrested and hundreds jailed without charge. The average detainee spent a week in jail, and the vast majority, 87%, were never charged with a crime. By January 1971, only 62 had been charged. Within a month, half of them were released and the charges were dropped. In the end, only 18 people were convicted of a crime arising from the crisis. Only 2 were actually convicted of FLQ ties, and none provided information leading to the kidnappers. Trudeau said every government in this country is well aware of the existence of deep and important social problems. and every government, to its limit of its resources and ability, is deeply committed to their solution, but not by kidnappings and bombings, but by hard work. The cause of the October crisis was the FLQ goal to strive to make Quebec an independent state.
They believed that the federal government, aka the English speakers, called all the shots, and that the FLQ didn't have a choice or say.
FLQ were fed by nationalistic discontent and the rising unemployment, and by the example of colonial states rising against foreign imperialism. The FLQ emerged to the creation of an independent Quebec state. It vowed to use any means necessary.